We'll be looking at transitions, prepositions, and subordinators of concession. Um, in other words, expectation versus reality. So, what is concession? What do we mean by concession? There are some definitions online. However, when we look at the function of the transitions, the subordinators, the prepositions, basically the connectors, when we look at the connectors, the function of these connectors, we see that they're basically contrasting an expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. So, for example, if yet, you might be familiar with the coordinating conjunction yet. The function of yet is to contrast an expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. So, for example, expectation: he lost a fortune gambling, so he was poor. We expect that if he loses a fortune gambling, well, then he should be poor. Yet, he lives in a mansion. So that is the reality. Our expectation, he should be poor. The reality, he lives in a mansion. And this is the way that the connectors we will be looking at today function. Okay, let's start with transitions of concession. Okay, before we start, let's do a quick review. Remember that a transition comes between two independent clauses, and the transition shows the relationship of the second sentence to the first sentence. So, for example, independent clause 1, everyone owns a cell phone these days, period. Consequently, second sentence, people don't use payphones. Okay, here we can see that we have a cause and effect relationship between the two sentences. Okay, so these are transitions. They come between sentences and they show the relationship between two sentences. Let's look a little bit at the punctuation now. There are two options for punctuation before transition. The first one is a period. Okay, so for example, independent clause 1, everyone owns a cell phone these days, period. Consequently, capitalize after the period, comma, people don't use payphones anymore. Okay, and you can also use a semicolon. Okay, a semicolon before the transition. So, for example, okay, everyone owns a cell phone these days, semicolon. Consequently, don't capitalize after semicolon, comma, people don't use payphones anymore. So very quickly, a period or a semicolon comes before the transition, can come before the transition, and a comma must follow the transition. Next, let's look at the transitions that we will be studying today. We use nevertheless and nonetheless to contrast an expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. So, for example, nevertheless, expectation: he lost a fortune gambling, therefore he was poor. Okay, that's our expectation. The reality: he lost a fortune gambling, nevertheless, he is still rich. We can also use nonetheless. For example, expectation: their motorcycles were faster, therefore his car lost the race. Okay, that's our expectation. If their motorcycles are faster, he should lose a race. The reality: their motorcycles were faster, nonetheless, his car won the race. Okay, moving forward, let's look at concessions of prepositions of concession. Okay, before we start, let's review quickly what is a prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrase: despite the cold, he was comfortable. Okay, here's the preposition: despite the object, the cold, and all of this, despite the cold, is a prepositional phrase. Okay, we have a preposition and an object. Okay, so basically, a prepositional phrase has a preposition and an object, such as a noun phrase. Some examples of prepositions that you may have studied: in, on, at, okay, from. All of those are prepositions and they accept an object, which is a noun. Okay, move forward. So let's look at the prepositions of concession. Despite and in spite of are used to contrast an expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. So, for example, despite, expectation: being cold, he was uncomfortable. This is our expectation. If he's cold, he should be uncomfortable. Okay, reality: despite being cold, he was comfortable. Okay, there we go. Contrast an expectation with a sudden and unexpected reality. Okay, in spite of expectation: because of the darkness, they felt scared. Okay, expectation. If it's dark, they should feel scared. Reality. In spite of the darkness, they were happy. Okay, so there we go. Despite of and in spite of are used to contrast expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. Moving forward, let's look now at concession, subordinators of concession. Okay, remember that a subordinator, you have a dependent clause, that is a clause with a subordinator, or like a baby sentence, and it needs to have an independent clause or a mommy sentence. Okay, a complex sentence is a dependent clause combined with an independent clause. Okay, so for example, although he spoke English well, my dependent clause, comma, he never spoke up in class. And although is a subordinating conjunction. Okay, subordinate conjunction. It's a subordinator. Okay, once you add although to a sentence, it is no longer a sentence. It is a dependent clause, and it needs an independent clause. And all of this is a complex sentence. Okay, moving forward. Okay, subordinating conjunctions come at the beginning of a dependent clause, and because it has a subordinating conjunction, although he spoke English well, is no longer a sentence. Cannot be made into a sentence. It needs to have its independent clause, an independent clause. Moving forward now. So let's look at some such subordinators. Even though, although, though, and while. We use even though, although, though, and while to contrast an expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. So for example, even though he lost a fortune gambling, so he was poor. Again, we expect that if he loses a fortune, a lot of money, he should be poor. But the reality is, even though he lost a fortune gambling, he lives in a mansion. Same thing with although, same relationship. Okay, contrast an expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. Expectation, their motorcycles were faster, so his car lost. The reality, okay, our expectation, if their motorcycles are faster, he should lose a race. But the reality is, although their motorcycles were faster, his car won the race. Okay, so that concludes this presentation. If you have any thoughts, questions, or concerns, please email me. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in class. Lastly, all of my images come from the Clip Art Library. Thank you so much for watching.